I think probably the most underappreciated component of a coaster layout is the sequencing. Yeah, I know I said this about pacing, but like, for real this time, no one talks about the sequencing. And the sequencing is actually like one of the most important things. Enthusiasts talk about elements, they talk about pacing, they talk about theming, but no one talks about the sequencing of the elements themselves, the order that they're in. The sequencing is what takes a handful of good elements and turns them into a masterpiece to be hailed by enthusiasts. You could have a banger first drop, some great inversions, some fun twists and turns along the way, but if your sequencing is wrong, it sucks ass. Yeah, you see what I mean now? I think the best coasters are only the best because of their sequencing. If your sequencing sucks, everything sucks. Pacing, what's that? Originality? Not with that attitude. You get bored, it gets repetitive, it just sucks. A well-sequenced coaster will keep you engaged and doesn't burn all of its elements at once. Each of the elements should feed off of each other. This element should make the next one feel better, and the next one after that should be unique from both of those. There are only so many elements in a coaster, so keeping the sequencing on point is a must in order for the coaster not to get repetitive, but also not lose all its steam by the end. Everything has to be spaced out. The good elements can't all be at the beginning because then it's just downhill. At the same time, you can't just have killer element after killer element after killer element because you need to give us a chance to breathe. It's a pretty difficult task to take elements and actually form it into a layout, but when done well, it's beautiful. Almost every coaster can be broken down into 3 different parts: the beginning, the middle, and the end. Yes, I know, ladies and gentlemen, I'm a genius. Unlike stories, a coaster doesn't follow an arc. Usually coasters are like this. But the best coasters are like this. You got a chain lift, which is basically like a flat line, but you know, maybe you have a little bump here because there's a little thrill like a cable lift or vertical lift, I don't know. But then you have the beginning, which should be a huge spike, something flashy and engaging. The middle should maintain this momentum with a slight increase but never a drop. And then the end should be like... Most coasters adhere to this formula, except shuttle coasters. They kind of just throw that out the window, but whatever, it's fine, it's okay. All these parts to a coaster are equally as important, but actually they're not. The middle is the least important, but it's still important. That being said, we'll get to that when we get to that, and we're gonna start off with the coaster has to start off with a bang. I don't care how you do it. It could be a cool first drop, an interesting pre-lift, a launch, a nice view. It could really be anything. You gotta hook us. You have to make sure we're engaged right from the get-go. Obviously, the best example of this is a first drop. The worst thing you can do is have a forgettable first drop. If you have the height, then it doesn't matter, because once you crack 200 feet, most drops are pretty good, no matter what, unless you're G Vanola. But when you have a smaller drop, that's where you have to get creative. Probably my favorite way of manufacturers doing this is going beyond vertical. Gerstlauer does this a lot with their coasters, but we've seen a couple other coasters do it as well. I mean, look at the El Locos. These things are pretty small, like they're comparable to a Wild Mouse. So what do? They make their drops look straight out of a horror movie. Maverick, pretty small, right? But some people still say it has one of the most intense drops at Cedar Point. These beyond vertical drops are a great way to spice up a little drop and make it into something much bigger than it actually is. But maybe you don't want to do a beyond vertical drop, and that's fine too. There are plenty of other ways that you can make a great first drop. You could build it into an inversion. You could pick up some speed going into it. Maybe you do a drop into a tunnel or a head chopper halfway down. You could make it larger by digging into terrain, but you don't need to. Hold us up there for a minute, take us up by a vertical lift, give it a twist, do literally anything but this. Don't do this. This is garbage. A bland or forgettable first drop always brings the ride down to like an 8 out of 10 for me right off the bat. But there are tons of other ways besides drops to kick off a great ride. Something that's always been cool to me are these pre-lift sections, because they don't have to be there and we would actually have no idea if there were there. I mean, there could have been pre-lift sections planned for all of these coasters taken out at the last minute and we wouldn't even know it. Most coasters don't have a pre-lift and that is perfectly fine, but having it gives it that extra bit of character, that bit of pizzazz, you know? It's a unique way to kick off things before you really kick things off. But after you wow the riders with that first bang, you need to follow up with some killer elements. The first couple of elements after that beginning should set the tone of the ride. It should give the riders an idea of what to expect from the rest of it. When you go up those first 2 camelbacks in ElToro, that's when you say, hey, I think this coaster might be about airtime. When you hug that quarry wall going down an iron rattler only to go back on top of it and then to fall right back off of it, you already know you're gonna be playing leapfrog with this wall for the rest of the ride. But you also shouldn't use your best elements all at the beginning. Using my previous example of ElToro, yeah, you got those first 2 camelbacks in the beginning, but then you got that violent rolling thunder hill thrown in there just at the end to keep you from falling asleep. Not that you would fall asleep in ElToro, you know what I mean. These first few elements should set the tone, but they shouldn't be everything that the ride has to offer. After the first couple of elements, you have the middle section. The sole purpose of the middle section is to keep the momentum going for the end. I know, very interesting, right? But it is actually pretty important. If you lose all that steam from the beginning in the middle section, it's over. You failed. Coasters stink. No, I'm kidding. A good coaster can keep the middle interesting while also setting up for the finale. Look at Raptor. You drop off the mid-course, then goes into this super snappy corkscrew. And then you have this this slower S-bend that sets up into another corkscrew that goes right into its finale, which is that double helix. Another good example is Carnan. The main point in the middle is to turn this around, but instead of just having a long, boring, uninspired turn, it mixes things up with these twists and airtime pops to set you up for that finale that twists into an airtime hill. And then there's the real finale. You know what I'm talking about if you've been on it. Max Force. This is a very short ride. Yes, I get it. But even this can be split up into a beginning, a middle, and an end. The middle part has to attach these two afts. It needs to be a bridge from that dog tongue to the non-inverting, but also inverting dive loop thing. I don't know. So what do? They do a super snappy heartline roll. They could have gone with straight track. They could have gone with a mediocre airtime hill or something, but instead they keep the ride alive. The middle section of the ride is the hardest to get right because it shouldn't overshadow the ending, but it also needs to keep the coaster alive after that fiery start. There are tons of other examples I would talk about, but I really want to move on to the end, because that's where the coasters really shine. The ending is easily the most important part of the ride. You'd have a cool lift, a killer first drop, a first element that gives you a good idea about what the coaster is about, and a middle that sets up perfectly for that ending, and you'll still be slept on. But if you have a great finale that's the best part of the ride, you'll be considered the best wooden coaster by the Golden Ticket Awards. Most coasters end up going one of two ways. The most common approach is to just do what you did well, but now amp it up to 1,000. I really like this approach, because it keeps everything consistent, so that first element was just a tease of what is to come. I mean, look at Maverick. First couple of twists are crazy, but like, they're nothing compared to those barbaric snaps at the end of the ride. Look at the Beast. Those first drops and turns are a nice way to ease you into the ride, but that helix is what you walk away with. Great finale gives you something to remember the coaster by. Something that stays in your mind and just makes you go, damn, just run that whole thing back again. But then you have the other, slightly riskier approach. This is where the coaster introduces something completely new at the last second. And this can go one of two ways. There's the way that everyone likes to talk about, and there's the way that no one likes to talk about. The first way is the way where it works. This is like Ghost Rider's Final Helix or Outlaw Run's Double Barrel Roll. It's something completely different from everything else we've seen in the ride thus far, but it actually works. On El Toro, you're up in the clouds for most of the ride, and then at the last second, it just yanks you down, and you're like, oh, here we go. Fury is all about those turns and speeds and transitions, but then at the end, it decides to throw in some killer airtime hills. Phantom's Revenge is all about these big, drawn-out drops, but then right before you hit the brakes, you have some of the most demonic elements yet created. These are all great when they're done well, because there is an alternative route that I was talking about before, when the coaster has a really strong beginning and middle, but then at the end, it tries something new and completely falls flat on its face. I think the best example of this is Mako. For the beginning and the middle, you have an incredible ride. You're like, oh my god, this is incredible. B&M, even better than 5-second floater hill, baby. I love right there. Oh my god, so much floater, so much lift. Best coaster ever, baby. What is this? What happens here? Mako still looks great, but that ending really does not hold up to the rest of the ride. But on the other hand, a good ending can elevate a coaster into god tier. There are endings that just transcend the rest of the coaster and bring it up to this level of decadence that the rest of the ride doesn't really hold up to, but the ending is so good that the ride as a whole is thought of at that level. A good example of this is Magnum. Now, while I haven't ridden Magnum, I'm going to be honest, the beginning and middle don't look that great. I mean, you got this long, drawn-out beginning with a trimmed turnaround, those bulky aero lap bars. I mean, up until this point, there's not a whole lot to... Oh my god! Look at this. Jeez, have mercy. Okay, yeah, maybe this coaster wasn't so bad after all. I love a good ending to a coaster. It just fills me with so much joy when I'm riding, realizing that first drop I thought was insane, no, that was just alright. A finale ties everything together, and to me, that makes it easily the most important part of a coaster, and in a lot of cases, the best part. But yeah, I just wanted to make a video on coaster sequencing, because a lot of people just don't really talk about it. People always praise rides for a couple of specific elements, but they never really appreciate the order they come in. But tell me in the comments what you think below. I want to hear any other examples you can think of coasters being broken up into the middle, beginning, and end, not in that order. There are a lot I didn't touch on, so let me know what you guys think of in the comments. Anyways, thank you guys so much for watching, and I'll see you in the next one.